Okay, we have another unboxing slash shout out. So no race today. That's two no races this week. Sorry guys. Maybe Friday. We'll see how it goes. But we do have an unboxing, which is exciting. So hopefully you like that. Are you ready? Here we go. Shout out time. Here's a shout out just for you. You support me, so I support you. This shout out is for our friends at Three Souls Paranormal. Guess what? They do paranormal stuff. They are Frank. Hang on a minute. Okay, they are Frank, Mark, and Scott. They are from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And Rob, excuse me. Did I do that wrong? That's 4. Scott, Frank, Mark, and Rob. That's 4. You guys need to change your names. Anyway, they investigate cemeteries, asylums, prisons, and bringing evidence that they capture. We hope to do more of that in 2024. We've got a couple leads, so we're just hoping and waiting and seeing budgetary if we can do them. So, fingers crossed. We'll see. In the meantime, let's see what they sent us. Hang on. This is the box. Okay, first thing we have here is a bracelet. These are kind of their colors, I'm guessing. We got some skull and bones necklaces, which Angel will like. Very cool. I am on a roll today. I got a pumpkin, which does not turn on, which means I'm going to need to get batteries for it. And a cup. That's kind of very cool. Oh, look at their card, their business card. Three Souls Paranormal. It kind of looks like ours, except for theirs has their email on the dress on the back. Hat noises! Booyah! Oh yeah, wear that this winter. I've been needing a new hat. Shot glasses. That's very cool. I'll probably give those to Angel. Another pumpkin. Another glass. There's a sticker in this glass. It says Three Souls Paranormal. They hunt you, we hunt them. Ooh, do you have a hunting license? Ooh, that is very cool. Three Souls Paranormal bottle opener. And some groovy hair ties, which Angel will probably steal. Ooh, another hat. This one's feeling spooky. Cups. Which, you know what's funny about these cups? I bought bowls and plates, but I did not buy the cups. That's funny. We got socks. Ooh. It is purple bat garland for Halloween. That'll be cool for decorating next year. Clips with see no evil, hear no evil, and just evil. Then we've got some DVDs. We'll have to see if Angel wants any of these, but maybe we'll give these away. We've got Awoken, Girl in the Mirror, Dollface, and Killer Hand. And of course the basket. Awesome basket, guys. When you when you told me that you were sending a basket, I never imagined that there would be so much inside. We appreciate you immensely. Let's see if we can send something back. I'll talk to Joe. Check Three Souls Paranormal out. Like, share, comment. Have a good day. Alright. There I go, Mr. Bed.
Alright, well, the 9th of November, 1989, you might say that that's the tail end of the story, but for the simplicity, we'll just say that that was when the Berlin Wall fell. But there's a whole segment of history before it, and it actually dates all the way back to shortly after World War II happened. Now, at the end of World War II, in Europe, what remained of the pre-war Germany west of the Oder-Neisse line was divided into 4 occupation zones, as outlined in the Potsdam Agreement, and each one was controlled by the 4 occupying Allied forces, the US, the UK, France, and the Soviet Union. The capital of Berlin as well was divvied up that way. Now, within 2 years, political divisions increased between the Soviets and the other occupying powers. We've commonly referred to this as the Cold War. The Soviets refusing to agree to reconstruction plans, making post-war Europe self-sufficient, a detailed accounting of the industrial plants, goods, and infrastructure, some of which had already been removed by the Soviets. It's like, we're going to gut this fish and get it over with. France, the UK, and the United States, and the Benelux countries met later to combine the non-Soviet zones of Germany into one plan for reconstruction known as the Marshall Plan. Well, part of the problem that was going on with this Cold War is the Soviet Union was busy trying to occupy countries. They had gone into Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Bulgaria, Romania, and the GDR, which together with Albania formed what was called Comecon in 1949, and later a military alliance we know as the Warsaw Pact. Well,
They really named it Comic Con?
Comecon, see?
I heard Comic Con.
Comic Con? No. That would be cool, because then we could have Marvel. And we could,
I think that's when my brain was like, wait, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Later, we did the same thing, though. We wound up making NATO, and that included the Western Bloc countries. Now, the Soviet Union already had an armed presence and political domination over those eastern satellite states, and by 1955, the pact had long been considered superfluous because the way it was rushed together and conceived, NATO officials labeled it a cardboard castle. No direct military confrontation between the two organizations. Instead, the conflict was fought on an ideological basis through proxy wars. Both NATO and Warsaw Pact led to the expansion of military forces and the integration into respective blocs. The Warsaw Pact largest military engagement was the invasion of Czechoslovakia, its own member state, in August of 1968. Well, since the war, the USSR installed a Soviet-style regime in those occupied zones of Germany and later founded the GDR, the country's political system based on a centrally planned socialist economic model with a nationalized means of production, with its repressive secret police institutions, which seems kind of a normal thing for Soviet countries. I'm not even going to try to pronounce that one, SED, Socialist Unity Party of Germany, similar to the party dictatorship of the Soviet Communist Party in Russia. Now, at the same time, a parallel country was established under the control of the Western powers in the zones of post-war Germany, occupying them, culminating in the formation of the Federal Republic of Germany, and its capital was in Bonn. Now, they initially claimed to be the sole legitimate power of all of Germany, east and west. The material standard of living in the western zones of Berlin began to improve quickly, and the residents of the Soviet Union soon began to leave for the West in large numbers, fleeing hunger, poverty, and repression in the Soviet zone. Now, soon residents of other parts of the Soviet zone began to escape to the West through Berlin, and this migration, called the Germany Republic Flucht, deprived the Soviet Union not only of working forces desperately needed for post-war reconstruction, but disproportionately highly educated people, which became known as brain drain. Well, in 1940, rain the drain, all your smart people are going over the border. Well, could we change the country? Oh, heck no, we can't change the country.
Well, what would that be?
Yeah, it takes all our planning away of brutalizing them. Well, in 1948, in response to these moves by the Western powers to establish a separate federal system of government and extend the U.S. Marshall Plan of economic assistance to Germany, the Soviets threw up the Berlin blockade. Now, this little trick prevented people, food, materials, and supplies from arriving in West Berlin by land routes through the Soviet zone. The U.S., the United Kingdom, France, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and several other countries began a massive airlift. This was supplying West Berlin with food, other supplies. The Soviets mounted a public relations campaign against the Western policy change. The Communists attempted to disrupt the elections in 1948, proceeding large losses therein, while 300,000 Berliners demonstrated for the international airlift to continue. By May of 1949, Stalin lifted the blockade, permitting the resumption of Western shipments to Berlin. Now, the German Democratic Republic, or the East Germany, was declared on the 7th of October, 1949. On that day, the USSR ended Soviet military government, which had governed the Soviet occupation zone since the end of the war, and handed over legal power to the Prostovorich Volkshammer under the new constitution of the GDR, which came into force that day. For those of us who remember World Book Encyclopedia, just remember, any democratic republic isn't. But the implicit threat of force that could be exercised by the continuing large Soviet military presence in the country basically means you're on your own, but we're still here to shoot you. Now, the GDR, the Soviet military presence, helped the GDR, in which they repressed protests in East Germany bloodily in June of 1953. Now, East Germany differed from Western Germany, which developed a Western capitalist country with a social market economy and a democratic parliamentary government. Continual economic growth started in the 1950s, funded a 20-year economic miracle. As West Germany's economy grew and the standard of living improved, many East Germans wanted to move to West Germany. I wonder why. Now, after the Soviet occupation of Eastern Europe at the end of World War II, the majority of those living in these newly acquired areas aspired to independence and wanted the Soviets to leave. Taking advantage of the zonal border between the occupied zones in Germany, a number of GDR citizens moving to West Germany totaled 187,000 in 1950, 165,000 in 1951, 182,000 in 1952, and 331,000 in 1953. One reason for the sharp increase was the potential further Sovietation, given the increase of paranoid actions of Joseph Stalin in 52 and 53. In the first 6 months of 1953, 226,000 people had fled. I'm surprised people didn't get a clue, but, you know, most dictators don't. Now, in the early 1950s, the Soviet approach to controlling national movement, restricting immigration, and emulating most of the rest of the Eastern Bloc, including East Germany, the restrictions presented a quandary for Eastern Bloc states which had more economically advanced and open than the Soviet Union, such as the crossing borders, seemed more natural, especially when no prior border existed between East and West Germany. Up until 52, demarcation lines between the East Germany and the Western occupied zones could be easily crossed in most places. Well, on the 1st of April 1952, East German leaders met with Joseph Stalin in Moscow, and during discussions, Stalin's foreign minister proposed that the East Germans should introduce a system of passes for visits to West Berlin residents to the territory of East Berlin, so as to stop free movement of Western agents in the GDR. Stalin agreed, calling the situation intolerable. He advised the East Germans to build up their border defenses, telling them that the demarcation line between the East and West Germany should be considered a border, and not just any border, but a dangerous one. The Germans will guard the line of defense with their lives. Consequently, the inner German border between the two German states was closed, and a barbed wire fence was erected. The border between the western and eastern sections of Berlin, however, remained open. That seems kind of silly. Let's go visit Berlin, guys. Why? Because we're going to the west.
I mean...
if you're going to do it, go for it. Although traffic between the Soviet and western sectors was somewhat restricted, the results in Berlin becoming a magnet for East Germans desperate to flee the GDR, and also a flashpoint of tension between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. In 1955, the Soviets gave East Germany authority over civilian movement in Berlin, passing control to a regime not recognized in the West. Initially, East Germany granted visits to allow residents access to West Germany. However, following the defection of a large number of East Germans, known as Republikflucht, under this regime, the new East German state legally restricted visually all travel to the West in 1956. Soviet East German ambassador Mikhail Perushkin observed the presence in Berlin of an open, essentially uncontrolled border between the socialist and capitalist worlds unwittingly prompts the population to make a comparison between the both parts of the city, which unfortunately does not turn out in the favor of the East Berlin. Oops.
Oops.
Now, with the closing of the inner German border official in 1952, the border in Berlin remained considerably more accessible because it was administered by 4 occupying powers. Accordingly, Berlin became the main route for which East Germans left to the west. And on the 11th of December 1957, East Germany introduced a new passport law that reduced the overall number of refugees leaving Eastern Germany. It had the unintended result of drastically increasing the percentage of those leaving through West Berlin from 60% to well over 90% by the end of 1958. Those caught trying to leave East Berlin were subject to heavy penalties, but with no physical barrier and subway access still available to West Berlin, such measures were ineffective. The Berlin sector border was essentially a loophole through which Eastern Bloc citizens could still escape. 3.5 million East Germans who had left by 1961 totaled nearly 20% of the entire East German population.
That doesn't seem like much.
Yeah, because there's only 3-some million people.
I know, but when you say 20%, you're like, that's not a lot.
Not a lot. But it makes you wonder, like they say with the brain drain issue. An important reason for that passage between East Germany and West Berlin was not stopped earlier, was that doing so would cut off much of the railway traffic in East Germany. Construction of a new railway bypassing West Berlin, the Berlin Outer Ring, commenced in 1951. Following the completion of the railway in 1961, the closing of the border became a more practical proposition. Now, the immigrants tended to be young and well-educated, leading to the brain drain feared by officials in East Germany. Jurian Dropoff, then the CPSU Director of Relations with Communist and Workers' Parties of Socialist Countries, wrote an urgent letter on the 28th of August in 1958 to the Central Committee about the significant 50% increase of the number of East German intelligent people among the refugees. And Dropoff reported that while East German leadership stated that they were leaving for economic reasons, testimony from refugees indicated that the reasons were more political than material. He stated the flight of the intelligentsia had reached a particularly critical phase. In 1960, the combination of World War II and the massive immigration westward left East Germany with only 61% of its population of working age, compared to 70.5% before the war. This loss was disproportionately heavy among professionals, engineers, technicians, physicians, teachers, lawyers, and skilled workers. The direct cost of manpower losses to East Germany had been estimated at $7 billion to $9 billion, with East German party leader Walter Ulrich later claiming that West Germany owed him $17 billion in compensation, including reparations as well as manpower losses. In addition, the drain of East Germany's young population potentially costed over 22.5 billion marks in lost educational investment. The brain drain of professionals had become so damaging to political credibility and economic viability of East Germany that the resecuring of East German communist frontier was imperative. Now, the exodus of immigrants from East Germany presented two minor potential benefits: an easy way to smuggle East German secret agents to the West, and a reduction of the number of citizens hostile to the communist regime. Neither of these advantages, however, proved particularly useful. Yeah, we want to get out of here, dudes. Now, when you look at 1961, on the 15th of June, the first secretary of the Socialist Unity Party and GDR State Council Chairman Walter Ulrich stated in an international press conference, "No one has the intention of erecting a wall." It was the first time the colloquial term Mauer or wall had ever been used in this context. Now, a transcript of a telephone call between Nikita Khrushchev and Ulrich on the 1st of August in the same year suggests that the initiative for a construction of a wall came from Khrushchev. However, other sources suggest that Khrushchev had initially been wary of building a wall, fearing negative Western reaction. Nonetheless, Ulrich had pushed for a border closure for some time, arguing that East Germany's existence was at stake. "So we got to do something. I'm losing all the people here." Khrushchev became emboldened upon seeing U.S. President John F. Kennedy's youth and inexperience, which he considered a weakness. In the 1961 Vienna summit, Kennedy made the error of admitting that the U.S. wouldn't actively oppose the building of a barrier. Oops. A feeling of miscalculation and failure immediately afterwards was admitted by Kennedy in a candid interview with the New York Times. On Saturday, the 12th of August, the leaders of the GDR intended a garden party at a government guest house in a wooded area north of East Berlin. There, Ulrich signed the order to close the border and erect a wall. At midnight, the police and units of the East German Army began to close the border, and by Sunday morning, the 13th of August, the border with West Berlin was closed. East German troops and workers had begun to tear up streets running alongside the border to make them impassable to most vehicles, and installed barbed wire entanglements and fences along the 97-mile around three western sectors and the 27 miles that divided West and East Berlin. Now, the date of the 13th of August became commonly referred to as the Barbed Wire Sunday in Germany. Now, the barrier was built inside East Berlin on East German territory to ensure it did not encroach on West Berlin at any point. Generally, the wall was only slightly inside East Berlin, but in a few places it was some distance from the legal border, most notably the Potsdamer Bahnhof and the Linie Triangle. That was now much of the Potsdamer Platz development. Later, the initial barrier was built up into the wall proper. The first large concrete elements and large blocks were put in place on the 17th of August. During construction of the wall, the National People's Army, the NVA, and combat groups of the working class, the KDA, soldiers stood in front of it with orders to shoot anyone who attempted to defect. Additionally, chain fences, walls, minefields, and other obstacles were installed along the length of the East Germans' wall border with West Germany proper. A wide no-man's land was cleared as well to provide a better overview and a clear line of fire at fleeing refugees.
Woo.
Now, let's think about this a moment. Okay? You've got East Germans willing to shoot at other East Germans, all because they don't want to stay in your country anymore. Congratulations, you guys are building a prison. Now, the immediate effects with the closing of the east-west sector boundary in Berlin, the vast majority of East Germans could no longer travel or immigrate to West Germany. Berlin soon went from being the easiest place to make an unauthorized crossing to being the most difficult. Many families were split. East Berliners employed by the West were cut off from their jobs. West Berlin became an isolated enclave in a hostile land. West Berliners demonstrated against the wall, led by their mayor, Willy Brandt, who criticized the West for failing to respond and went so far as to suggest that Washington what to do next. And Kennedy was furious. Allied intelligence agencies had hypothesized about a wall to stop the flood of refugees, but the main candidate for this location was around the perimeter of the city. In 1961, Secretary of State Dean Rusk proclaimed, "The wall certainly ought not to be a permanent feature of the European landscape. I see no reason why the Soviet Union would think it is. It is to their advantage in any way to leave that there as a monument to communist failure." Now, the United States and UK sources had expected the Soviet sector to be sealed off from West Berlin, but they were surprised on how long the East Germans took for such a move. They considered the wall as an end to concerns about the GDR Soviet retaking or capture of the whole of Berlin. The wall would presumably have been an unnecessary project if such plans were afloat. Thus, they concluded the possibility of Soviet military conflict over Berlin had decreased. Now, the East German government claimed that the wall was an anti-fascist protective rampart. Really? Now, how many of us hear about a bunch of saber-rattling about anti-fascists?
No.
Locally. Are they Soviets? We don't know. Intended to dissuade aggression from the West. Another official justification was the activities of Western agents in Eastern Europe. The Eastern German government also claimed that West Berliners were buying out state-subsidized goods in East Berlin. East Germans and others greeted such statements with skepticism, as most of the time the border was only closed for citizens of East Germany traveling to the West, but not for residents of West Berlin traveling to the East. The construction of the wall had caused considerable hardship for families divided by it. Most people believed the wall was simply a means of preventing the citizens of East Germany from entering or fleeing to the West Berlin. Now, the National Security Agency was the only American intelligence agency that was aware East Germany was about to take action with the deal with the brain drain problem. On the 9th of August, the NSA intercepted an advance warning information of the Socialist Unity Party's plan to close the intra-Berlin border between the East and West Berlin completely for foot traffic. Interagency Intelligence Berlin Watch Committee assessed this intercept and might be the first step in a plan to close the border. This warning didn't reach John F. Kennedy until noon on the 13th, when he was vacationing on his yacht off the Kennedy compound in Massachusetts. While Kennedy was angry they had no advance warning, he was relieved that the East Germans and the Soviets had only divided Berlin without taking any action against West Berlin's access to the West. However, he denounced the Berlin Wall, and the construction worsened the relations between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. Now, in response to this wall, the retired general Lucius D. Clay was appointed by Kennedy as his special advisor with ambassadorial rank. Clay had been the military governor of the U.S. zone of occupation in Germany during the period of the Berlin blockade, and had ordered the first measures in what became the Berlin airlift. He was immensely popular with the residents, and his appointment was an unambiguous sign that Kennedy was not going to compromise on the status of West Berlin. As a symbolic gesture, Kennedy sent Clay and Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson to West Berlin. They landed at the Tempelhof Airport on the afternoon of Saturday, the 19th of August, in 1961, and were greeted enthusiastically by the local population. Now, they arrived in a city defended by the Allied brigades, one from each of the UK, France, and the US, on the 16th of August, and Kennedy had given an order for them to be reinforced. Now, we remember the Soviets did not like seeing how we responded to the Berlin airlift. Early on the 19th of August, the 1st Battle Group, the 18th Infantry Regiment, was alerted, and on Sunday morning, U.S. troops marched from West Germany through East Germany, bound for West Berlin. Lead elements, arranged in a column of 491 vehicles and trailers carrying 1,500 men, divided into 5 marching units, left the Helmstedt-Marienborn checkpoint at 6:34 in the morning.
That must have been a sight.
Oh, yeah. At Melbourne, the Soviet checkpoint next to Helmstedt on the West German-East German border, U.S. personnel were counted by guards. The column was 99 miles long.
Wow. And
covered 110 miles from Melbourne to Berlin in full battle gear. Hey, sir, look at the army.
Yeah, it might be a problem.
We might be a little outnumbered on this one. Yeah, go ahead and stop us. Come at me. East German police watched from beside trees next to the Autobahn all the way along. The front of the convoy arrived at the outskirts of Berlin just before noon to be met by Clay and Johnson before parading through the streets of Berlin in front of a large crowd. At 4 o'clock on the 1st of August, Lyndon Johnson left West Berlin in the hands of General Frederick O. Hartel with his brigade of 4,224 officers and men. For the next 3.5 years, American battalions would rotate into West Berlin by Autobahn at 3-month intervals to demonstrate the Allied rights to the city. Now, the creation of the wall had some important implications for both German states by stemming the exodus of people from East Germany. The East German government was able to reassert its control over the country. In spite of its discontent with the wall, economic problems caused by the dual currency and the black market were largely eliminated. The economy began to grow. However, the wall proved a public relations disaster for the communist bloc as a whole. Western powers portrayed it as a symbol of communist tyranny, particularly after East German boards shot and killed would-be defectors. Such fatalities and later treated as acts of murder by the reunified Germany. Now, some of the stories that they talk about people who had tried to leave East Germany to get into West Germany, there were several high-profile cases. One involved 4 swimmers who hopped into the Spree River and swam under the wall into West Berlin. Just as they were coming on shore, they were shot one at a time. There was a case where a youngster who was born basically the day World War II ended, last name Fetcher, had gotten over the wall but got shot and was critically injured and laid at the bottom of the wall. The West Berliners couldn't rescue him because they were afraid of being shot by the Germans, the East Germans. And he was basically hauled back into East Germany and died there. They did have some cases of people becoming really creative in attempts to get to freedom. One of them was turned into a Disney movie called Night Crossing, where a family would get batches of fabric and they sewed together a hot air balloon, 2 of them in fact. The first one failed to make it over the wall, but the second one they were able to build and get over the wall and into freedom. They'd had people who, the first couple times that they built on the wall, they literally turned buildings into parts of the wall. They would, cement up the windows, they would close up the doors. People would still manage to get into those buildings and then drop out windows into West Berlin to freedom. Didn't work all the time. And of course then there, just like in our southern United States, they had people that would dig tunnels under the wall and to freedom. And then you'd have other creative people that would like hide in trunks. They would have people that would steal bulldozers and ram through the wall. They would have just all sorts of creative ways for people to try to get out. Now, here's where the meat and gravy of this thing comes through, because these are the numbers that they have on layout modifications for the walls. The initial wall bordering around West Berlin was within 3.4 meters and 4.2 meters in height, 156 kilometers long. 111 of that was concrete walls, 44.5 was metal mesh fence along the death strip, a cross detachment in Potsdam of 112.7 kilometers. A cross detachment along the border with the East and West Berlin was 43.7. Remains of house fronts, land mansion bricks, 0.5. Wall-shaped front wall with a height of 3.4 meters was 58.95 kilometers. Expanded metal fence with a height of 2.9 as the front barrier went up to 68.42 meters. A light strip of 161 kilometers. Limit signal and barrier fencing, 113.85. Contact and signal fences, 127.5. The border patrols, 124.3 kilometers. So they went through a lot of procedures to try to make this into the most secure way to stop people from getting free. They really loved each other.
Love.
Now, observation towers, these are where guys would sit and watch for, people trying to make a run for it. There was 186 of them constructed, 31 implementing agencies, 259 dog runs, and 20 bunkers. Now, the part that was crazy says the Berlin Wall was more than 140 kilometers long, and in June of 1962, a second parallel fence, also known as the Hinterland Wall or Inner Wall, was built some 110 yards farther into East Germany territory. The houses contained within the wall, between the wall and the fences, were raised and inhabitants relocated, thus establishing what later became known as the Death Strip. The Death Strip was covered in raked sand or gravel, rendering footprints easy to notice and easing the detection of trespassers, also enabling officers to see which guards had neglected their task. It offered no cover, and most importantly, it offered clear fields of fire for the wall guards. Now, through the years, the Berlin Wall evolved through 4 versions. The first one in 1961 was pretty simple. Wire fence, concrete block wall. Simple. If you run at the fence, sometimes you could jump over it. Other times, why does that dude running with a ladder? Well, you see, up and over. Now, in 62 to 65, they improved that wall wire fence. And then from 65 to 75, they improved the concrete wall. Now, the Grenzmauer 75 was a border wall. The 4th generation basically was a retaining wall element. UL 12.11 was the final and most sophisticated version of the wall, began in 75, and was completed about 1980. It was constructed from 45,000 separate sections of reinforced concrete, each 3.6 meters high, 12 feet high, and 3.9 feet wide. These are what we've got downtown in the park. At a cost of about $3.6 million each. Now, the concrete provisions added to this version of the wall were done to prevent escapees from driving their cars through the barricades. At strategic points, the wall was constructed with somewhat weaker standard so that East German and Soviet armored vehicles could easily break through in the event of war. Woo, let's crash in. Now, some of the other sections of the wall of the death strip also featured what were known as hedgehogs. These were kind of like what the Germans had in World War II. They were shaped like stars. Basically, they're designed to stop tanks. Of course, if you were trying to climb over them, you were also probably an easy target, too. The top of the wall was lined with a smooth pipe intended to make it more difficult to scale. The wall was reinforced by mesh fencing, signal fencing, anti-vehicle trenches, barbed wire, dogs on long lines, beds of nails, also known as Stalin's carpet, under balconies hanging over the death strip, over 116 watchtowers and 20 bunkers with hundreds of guards. The version of the wall is one of the most commonly seen in photographs, and surviving fragments of the wall in Berlin and elsewhere around the world are generally pieces of that fourth-generation wall. Now, the layout came to resemble the inner German border in most technical aspects, except that the Berlin Wall had no landmines nor spring guns. Maintenance was performed on the outside of the wall by personnel who accessed the area outside either via ladders or on hidden doors within the wall. The doors could not be opened by a single person, needing separate keys and 2 separate keyholes to unlock. As with the case with the inner German border, the unfortified strip of eastern territory left outside the wall. The outer strip was used by workers to paint over graffiti and perform other maintenance on the outside of the wall. Unlike the inner German border, however, the outer strip was usually no more than 4 meters wide, and in photos from the era, the exact location of the actual border in many places appears not to have even been marked. Also, in contrast to the inner German border, little interest was shown by East German law enforcement in keeping the outsiders off the outer strip. Sidewalks of West Berlin's streets even ran inside it. Now, despite East German government's general policy of benign neglect, vandals were known to have been pursued in the outer strip and even arrested. In 1986, defector and political activist Wolfram Hasch and 4 other defectors were standing inside the outer strip facing the wall when East German personnel emerged from one of the hidden doors to apprehend them. All but Hasch escaped back into the western sector. Hasch himself was arrested, dragged through the door into the death strip, and later convicted of illegally crossing the de jure border outside the wall. Graffiti artist Thierry Noir also reported having been pursued there by East German soldiers. While some graffiti artists were chased off the outer strip, some, such as Keith Harig, were seemingly tolerated. Now, besides the eastern sector boundary within Berlin Wall, the wall also separated West Berlin from the present-day state of Brandenburg. Now, the following present-day municipalities, listed in counterclockwise direction, share a border with the former West Berlin. Oberhavel, Havelland, Potsdam, the urban district, Potsdam Mittelmark, Teltow-Fläming, and Dom Spreewald. Official crossings that they had at the time. There were 9 border crossings between East and West Berlin. These allowed visits by West Berliners, other West Germans, Western foreigners, and Allied personnel into East Berlin, as well as visits by GDR citizens and citizens of other socialist countries into West Berlin, providing that they held the necessary permits. These crossings were restricted according to what nationality was allowed to use it: East Germans, West Berliners, and other countries. The best known of these vehicle and pedestrian checkpoints, at the corner of Friedrichstraße and Zimmerrad, the checkpoint Charlie, was restricted to Allied personnel and foreigners. Several other border crossings existed between West Berlin and the surrounding East Germany. These could be used for transit between West Germany and West Berlin, for visits by West Berliners into East Germany, for transit into neighboring countries from East Germany, Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Denmark, and for visits by East Germans into West Berlin carrying a permit. After the 72 agreements, new crossings were opened to allow West Berlin waste to be transported into East German dumps, as well as the same crossings for access to West Berlin's exclaves, see Steinstrucken. Now, 4 Autobahns connected West Berlin to West Germany, including the Berlin-Helmstedt Autobahn, which entered East German territory between the towns of Helmstedt and Marienborn, checkpoint Alpha, and which entered West Berlin at Drederland, checkpoint Bravo, for the Allied forces in southwestern Berlin. Access to West Berlin was also possible by railway in 4 routes and by boats by commercial shipping via canals and rivers. Now, non-German Westerners could cross the border at Friedrichstadt Station in East Berlin and at Checkpoint Charlie. When the wall was erected, Berliners' complex public transit networks, the S-Bahn and U-Bahn, were divided with it. Some lines were cut in half, many stations were shut down. 3 Western lines traveled through brief sectors of East Berlin territory, passing through eastern stations called Geisterbahnhof, or ghost stations, without stopping. Both the eastern and western networks converged at Friedrichstadt, which became a major crossing point for those, mostly Westerners, with permission to cross. Now, West Germans and citizens of other Western countries could generally visit East Germany, often after applying for a visa at an East German embassy several weeks in advance. Visas for day trips restricted to East Berlin were issued without previous application in a simplified procedure at the border crossing. However, East German authorities could refuse entry permits without stating a reason. In the 1980s, visitors from the western part of the city who wanted to visit the eastern part had to exchange at least 25 Deutschmarks into East German currency at the poor exchange rate of 1-to-1. It was forbidden to export East German currency from the east, but money not spent could be left at the border for possible future visits. Tourists crossing from the west also had to pay a visa, which cost 5 Deutschmarks. West Berliners did not have to pay this fee. West Berliners initially could not visit East Berlin or East Germany at all. All crossing points were closed to them from the 26th of August 1961 and the 17th of December 1963. In 63, negotiations between the East and West resulted in a limited possibility for visits during the Christmas season that year. Similar, very limited arrangements were also made in 64, 65, and 66. Now, in 71, the Four-Power Agreement on Berlin, agreements were reached that allowed West Berliners to apply for visas to enter East Berlin and East Germany regularly, comparable to the regulations already in force for West Germans. However, East German authorities could still refuse entry permits. East Berliners and East Germaners could not, at first, travel to West Berlin or West Germany at all. This regulation remained in force essentially until the fall of the wall, but over the years several exceptions to these rules were introduced, the most significant being that elderly pensioners could travel to the West starting in 64, visits of relatives for important family members, people who had to travel to the West for professional reasons such as artists, truck drivers, musicians, writers, etc. For each of these exceptions, the GDR citizens had to apply for individual approval, which was never guaranteed. In addition, even if travel was approved, GDR travelers could only exchange for a very small amount of East German marks into Deutschmarks, thus limiting the financial resources available to them to travel to the West. This led to the West German practice of granting a small amount of diem annually, or welcome money, to GDR citizens visiting the West Germany and West Berlin to help alleviate the situation. Now, citizens of other Eastern European countries were on the general subject of Eastern prohibition of visiting Western countries as East Germans, though the applicable exception, if any, varied from country to country. Allied military personnel and civilian officials of the Allied forces could enter and exit East Berlin without submitting to the East German passport controls, purchasing a visa, or being required to exchange money. Likewise, Soviet military officials could enter and exit West Berlin. This was a requirement of the post-war Four Powers Agreement. A particular area of concern for Western Allies involved official dealings with East German authorities when crossing the border, since Allied policy did not recognize the authority of the GDR to regulate Allied military traffic to and from West Berlin, as well as the Allied presence within Greater Berlin, including entry to, exit from, and presence within East Berlin. Now, the Allies held that only the Soviet Union and not the GDR had the authority to regulate Allied personnel in such cases. For this reason, elaborate procedures were established to prevent inadvertent recognition of East German authority when engaged in travel through the GDR and when in East Berlin. Special rules applied to travel from the Western Allied military personnel assigned to the military liaison missions accredited to the commander of Soviet forces in East Germany located in Potsdam. Now, Allied personnel were restricted by policy when traveling to land to the following routes. By road, the Helmstadt-Berlin Autobahn, the checkpoints of Alpha and Bravo, respectively. By rail, the Western Allied military personnel and civilian officials of Allied forces were forbidden to use any commercial train service other than service between West Germany and West Berlin, because the GDR passport and customs controls were when using them. Instead, the Allied forces operated a series of official stations in West Germany and West Berlin. When transiting the GDR, the trains would follow the route between Helmstedt and Gribenez, just outside West Berlin. In addition to personnel traveling in official business, authorized personnel could also use the duty trains for personal travel on a space-available basis. These trains traveled only at night, and with the transit by car, Soviet military personnel handled the processing of duty train travelers. Now, some of these defection attempts, as they mentioned, over 100,000 people tried. They didn't want to stay in East Berlin. They didn't want to stay in East Germany. Around 5,000 people successfully defected to the West. The number of people who died trying to cross the wall and the results of the wall's existence has been disputed. Most local claims by Alexander Hildenbrand, director of the Checkpoint Charlie Museum and widow of the museum's founder, estimated the death toll to be well above 200. A historic research group, the Center of Contemporary History in Potsdam, has confirmed at least 140 deaths. Prior figures listed as 98. Now, the East German government issued shooting orders to border guards dealing with defectors, though such orders were not the same as shoot-to-kill orders. The GDR officials denied issuing the latter, and in 73 of October, order later discovered by researchers, guards were instructed that people attempting to cross the wall were criminals and needed to be shot. Notes stated, "Do not hesitate to use your firearm, even when the border is breached in the company of women and children, which is a tactic the traitors have often used." Thanks, guys.
I mean, they're not wrong.
Yeah. Early successful escapees involved people jumping the initial barbed wire or leaping out of apartment windows across the line, but these ended when the wall was fortified. East German authorities no longer permitted apartments near the wall to be occupied, and any building near the wall had its windows boarded and later bricked up. On the 15th of August, Konrad Schumann became the first East German border guard to escape by jumping the barbed wire. On the 22nd of August, Ida Siegmann was the first casualty of the Berlin Wall. She died after she jumped out the third-floor apartment at 48 Bernauer Strasse. The first person to be shot and killed while attempting to cross West Berlin was Gunther Lifton, a 24-year-old tailor. He attempted to swim across the Spree to West Berlin on the 24th of August, 1961. The same day, the East German police had received the shoot-to-kill orders, preventing anyone from escaping. Another dramatic escape was carried out in April 1963 by Wolfgang Engels, a 19-year-old civilian employee. Engels stole a Soviet armored personnel carrier from a base where he was deployed and drove it right into the wall. He was fired at and seriously wounded by the border guards, but a West German policeman intervened, firing his weapon at least at the East German border guards, and the police removed Engels from the vehicle. He had become entangled in the barbed wire. The East Germans successfully defected by a variety of methods: digging long tunnels, waiting for favorable winds and taking a hot air balloon, sliding along aerial wires, flying ultralights, and in one instance, simply driving a sports car at full speed through the basic initial fortifications. Done it! When a metal beam was placed at checkpoints to prevent this kind of defection, up to 4 people, 2 in the front seats and possibly 2 in the boot, drove under the bar in a sports car that had been modified to allow the roof and windscreen to come away when it made contact with the beam. They lay flat and kept driving forward. The East Germans then built zigzagging roads at checkpoints.
The sewer system predated the wall, and some people escaped through the sewers. A number of cases with assistance from the Unterheim Reisbüro in the September of 1962, 29 people escaped through a tunnel to the west. At least 70 tunnels were dug under the wall. Only 19 were successful in allowing fugitives, about 400 people, to escape. The East German authorities eventually used seismograph and acoustic equipment to detect the practice. In 1962, they planned an attempt to use explosives to destroy one tunnel, but this was not carried out as apparently sabotaged by a member of the Stasi. Oops. Now, an airborne escape was made by Thomas Kruger, who landed a light aircraft of the Gestapo für Sport und Technik, an East German youth military training organization, at RAF Gatow. His aircraft, registered DDR WOH, was dismantled and returned to East Germany by road, complete with the humorous slogans painted on by airmen of the Royal Air Force saying, "Wish you were here and come back soon."
Mm-hmm.
We're going to mock you for this now.
Yes.
If an escape was wounded in a crossing attempt to lay on the death strip, no matter how close they were to the western wall, Westerners could not intervene for fear of triggering engaging fires from the Grepos, the East German border guards. The guards often let fugitives bleed to death in the middle of the ground. As most notorious failed attempt, the Peter Fetcher, 18 years old,
No.
at a point near Zimmerstrasse in East Berlin. He was shot and bled to death in full view of the Western media on the 17th of August, 1962. Fetcher's death created negative publicity worldwide that the leaders of East Berlin to place more restrictions on shooting in public places and providing medical care where possible for would-be escapers. The last person to be shot and killed when trying to escape and cross the border was Chris Gufoy on the 6th of February 1989, while the final person to die in an escape attempt was Winifred Frudberg, who was killed when his homemade natural gas-filled balloon crashed on the 8th of March 1989. Now, the wall gave rise to a widespread sense of desperation and oppression in East Berlin, and expressed in private diaries of one resident who confided in her diary, "Our lives have lost their spirit. We can do nothing to stop them." Now, with everything, Germany was pouring all this money into keeping this wall running. They were working really hard to make their so-called lives better. Eventually, things started to come unraveled in the Eastern Bloc. Economically, the failure of the USSR to intervene in relations of the individual communist states, the brackets of the Eastern Bloc slowly began to loosen. One example was the fall of the communist government in Poland in the 1989 legislative session. Also in June of 1989, the Hungarian government began to dismantle their electrified fence on the border with Austria. Although the border was still very closely guarded and escape was almost impossible. Now, the opening of the border guard between Austria and Hungary at the Pan-European picnic on the 19th of August 1989 was based on an idea by Otto von Habsburg to test the reaction of Mikhail Gorbachev. Then triggered the peaceful chain reaction. At the end of there was no longer the GDR, and the Eastern Bloc had disintegrated because of the non-reaction by the USSR and the GDR to the mass exodus. The media informed Eastern Europeans could feel the increasing loss of power of their governments, and more East Germans were now trying to flee via Hungary. Erich Honecker explained to the Daily Mirror regarding the Pan-European picnic, and thus showed his people his own inaction. Habsburg distributed leaflets far into Poland, on which the Eastern German holidaymakers were invited to a picnic. When they came to the picnic, they were given gifts, food, and Deutschmarks, and they were persuaded to come to the West. Then in September, more than 13,000 Eastern German tourists escaped through Hungary to Austria. This set up a chain of events. The Hungarians prevented many more East Germans from crossing the border and returned them to Budapest. These East Germans flooded the West German embassy and refused to return to East Germany. Hey, we're here now. You can't get rid of us, right? Now, the East German government responded by disallowing any further travel to Hungary, but allowed those already there to return to East Germany. This triggered similar events in neighboring Czechoslovakia. This time, however, the East German authorities allowed people to leave, provided they did so by train through East Germany. These were followed by mass demonstrations within East Germany itself. Protest demonstrations spread throughout East Germany in September of 1989. Initially, protesters were mostly people wanting to leave to the West, chanting, "We want out." The protesters began to chant, "We are staying here." This was the start of an East German generally called the Peaceful Revolution of late 1989. The protest demonstrations grew considerably by early November. Now, this movement reached its height on the 4th of November when 500,000 people gathered to demand political change at the Alexanderplatz demonstration, East Berlin's large public square and transportation hub. On the 9th of October, the police and army units were given permission to use force against those assembled, but did not deter the church service and march from taking place, in which 70,000 people gathered. That's a lot of frickin' people.
That is a lot.
That's like more than Rapid City. Let's all go show up.
Yep.
The longtime leader of East Germany, Erich Honecker, resigned on the 18th of October.
What?
And was replaced by Egon Krenz that day. Now, the wave of refugees leaving East Germany for the West kept increasing. By early November, refugees were finding their way to Hungary via Czechoslovakia or via the West German embassy in Prague. This was tolerated by the new Krenz government because the long-standing agreements with the communist Czechoslovak government allowing free travel across the common border. However, this movement of people grew so large it caused difficulties for both countries. Now, to ease the difficulties, the Politburo, led by Krenz, decided on the 9th of November to allow refugees to exit directly through the crossing points between East Germany and West Germany, including East and West Berlin. Later that same day, the ministerial administration modified the proposal to include private round-trip and travel. The new regulations were going to take effect the next day. Günter Starwowski, the party boss in East Berlin and spokesman of the SED Politburo, had the task of announcing the new regulations. However, he had not been involved in the discussions about the new regulations, had not been fully updated. Shortly before a press conference on the 9th of November, he was handed a note announcing the changes, by giving no further instructions on how to handle the information. These regulations had only been completed a few hours earlier and were to take effect the following day, but this starting time delay was not communicated to Schabowski about the next day. And at the end of the press conference, Schabowski read out loud the note he had been given. A reporter, Ricardo Ehrman, asked what the regulations would take effect. After a few seconds' hesitation, Schabowski replied, "As far as I know, it takes effect immediately without delay." Oh, crud. You remember all those people out there by the wall?
No.
After further questions from the journalists, he confirmed that the regulations included border crossings through the wall into West Berlin, which was not mentioned until then. He repeated that it was immediate in an interview to American journalist Tom Brokaw. Now, excerpts from Schabowski's press conference were the lead story on the two main news programs that night.
What?
At 7:17 p.m. on ZDF's Haupt and at 8 p.m. at ARD's Taschau, as a broadcast to nearly all of East Germany since the late 1950s have been accepted by the East German authorities. The news was broadcast there as well simultaneously. And later that night, ARD's Tegelsmann anchorman Hans Joachim Fredericks proclaimed, "The 9th November is a historic day. The GDR is announced. Starting immediately, the borders are open to everyone. The gates on the wall stand open wide." Upon hearing the broadcast, East Germans began gathering at the wall and at the 6 checkpoints between East and West Berlin, demanding the border guards immediately open the gates. The surprised and overwhelmed guards made many hectic telephone calls to their superiors about the problem. At first, they were ordered to find the more aggressive people gathered at the gates and stamp their passports with a special stamp that barred them from returning, in effect revoking their citizenship. However, this still left thousands of people demanding to be let through. As Schabowski said, it soon became clear that no one among the East German authorities would take personal responsibility for issuing orders to use lethal force, so the vastly outnumbered soldiers had no way to hold back the large crowd of East German citizens. Finally, 10:45 p.m. that night, on the 9th of November, Harald Jager, the commander of the Bornholm-Straub border crossing, yielded. allowing for the guards to open the checkpoints and allowing people through with little or no identity checking. As the Osses swarmed through, they were greeted by Wessels waiting with flowers and champagne amid wild rejoicing. Soon after, the crowd of West Berliners jumped on top of the wall and were soon joined by East German youngsters. The evening is known as the night the wall came down. Among other border crossings, the South may have been opened earlier, as an account by Hans Schaffer indicated that he also acted independently and ordered the opening of the gate at Walsdorf-Rudow a couple hours earlier. This may explain reports of East Berliners appearing in West Berlin earlier than the opening of the Bonhoeffer-Straub border crossing. Now, 30 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall, The Guardian collected short stories from the 9th of November, 1989, by 5 German writers to reflect on that day. At this day, Catherine Schmitz remembers comically, "I downed almost a whole bottle of schnapps." As things went through, what was left of the wall at its original site, which is destroyed almost in its entirety. 3 long sections are still standing. A 260-foot piece of the wall, westernmost wall, at the topography of Terror site, a former Gestapo headquarters. Halfway between Checkpoint Charlie and Potsdamer Platz, a longer section of the second easternmost wall along the Spree River near the Ulmbaumbrücke, nicknamed Eastside Gallery, and a third section that is partially reconstructed in the north of Bernauer Straub, which was turned into a memorial in 1998. And other fragments, lampposts, and other elements, and a few watchtowers also remain in various parts of the city. But as it goes, it was a wall that was put up. Basically, it turned a part of the city into a prison. They were determined, instead of keeping us out, they wanted to keep their people home. But is now consigned to a piece of history. But this has been Joe, the Bearded Historian, with another Wayback Wednesday. You folks have a good week, and we'll talk to you later.
So popping in, don't forget to wish David a happy birthday on Friday.